I'm Linda Wallen with Wallen Productions and a board member of WIFT. Tonight, our host is Kelly Pratt. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Kelly before I turn it over to her. She spent 10 years at the Minnesota Film and Television Board as assistant director, acting director, and director of production alongside Randy Adamsack, as well as 2 years as managing director. Kelly spent 17 years as publisher of the Minnesota Production Guide and was on WIFT board for 3 years and was one of its very first members when it began in 2005. She's currently founder of Athena Village, a women-centered online collaboration space that allows its members to be present in all aspects of who they are. I've known Kelly Pratt for decades, since and even before the time that she was instrumental in bringing the production of Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men to Minnesota. I've known Laura Belsey since around 2003, when I was her Midwest commercial director rep. And I'm thrilled to be producing this event and to be able to bring them together tonight to talk about Laura's experience in the industry. I want to encourage everyone to use the Q&A chat feature at the bottom to type in any questions you have for Laura. We'll make sure that she gets them. And at this time, I'm going to welcome Kelly.
Thank you so much. Yes, we have known each other for a while, Linda. It's interesting history. We're both from Fargo, and Fargo was one of the films that I brought in during my tenure at the Minnesota Film Board. So that was kind of a treat. And I'm very excited to get a chance to talk with Laura Belsey. Laura has really been on a journey with her history in the industry. She is a prolific episodic television director. She's worked on dozens and dozens of shows, including, okay, here's the list: The Walking Dead, American Horror Story, Shadow and Bone, Bosch, Genius, Picasso, Preacher, New Amsterdam, Arrow, The Flash, Animal Kingdom, SWAT, Manifest, Queen of the South, Blind Spot, Bull, Chicago Med. This is kind of reading like my watch list, actually. Criminal Minds, NCIS, New Orleans, Law and Order SVU, and many, many more. Prior to that, as Linda mentioned, she was directing, prior to directing television, Laura was an award-winning commercial director. So that's been her path, commercial directing to episodic television. Currently, she is serving as chair of the Directors Guild of America's Eastern Directors Council, and is very, very busy these days directing. So we are very lucky to have her with us tonight. Welcome, Laura. But before we start chatting, we are going to watch a reel of some of Laura's work. welcome Laura Belsey.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. I just want to quickly mention, my mother was born in Minnesota, so I'm super happy to be part of this, you know.
Great.
Yes.
I wondered about that. I asked Linda if she knew if you had any Minnesota connections. So there you go. Where in Minnesota? Do you remember?
Rochester.
Aha, Southern Minnesota. I'm sure we have some members from there. Well, welcome and thank you for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to talk with our members. As we chatted a little bit before our time this evening, Minnesota Women in Film and Television is really about connections. And it's about women supporting women and women in the industry. We'd love to kind of have you start with kind of a brief overview of your journey in the industry, how you got started and that path that you took.
Well, it's been a long journey with many ups and many downs. Fortunately, right now it's very up and I'm very grateful. I think the key is, you know, surviving and loving what you do. I started very early. I was an actor as a teenager. I grew up I was born in New Orleans. My mother's from Minnesota, my father's from New York. I was born in New Orleans and then I grew up in Switzerland. So I'm a bit of a hybrid. So in Europe, I started acting and I was bitten by the bug, fell in love with film, decided to go to NYU Film School. And kind of a year out of film school, started directing commercials, pretty young at 23. I was an anomaly at the time. You know, this was quite a while ago. There were not a lot of female directors, let alone 23-year-old female directors. But I was very determined and somewhat lucky and managed to do some work that got a lot of attention, won a bunch of awards, including at one point a Cannes Gold Lion. But commercials is you know, it had its ups and its downs. I'm super grateful to Linda and all the people who represented me and brought me work. But, you know, it was definitely, it was not always smooth sailing, just to put it that way. So, you know, we had some really good years and some really rough years. And, you know, I always wanted to tell longer stories. And I, at one point, started a feature film. The financing fell through, the whole film collapsed, I collapsed. And I kind of had to start over from zero and kind of decide what I was going to do next. So at that time, I saw this television show called The Wire. And I just fell in love with it. And that kind of filmmaking. And I realized that television really was the kind of filmmaking and storytelling that I wanted to do. So I just kind of literally was an outsider, starting from zero. And I just tried to figure out, how do I break in? How do I start over?
Wow.
And
so there was a mid-career change for you when you...
100%.
Okay.
So I learned about shadowing, which is something you can do in television. It wasn't as well known then as it is now. Now there are shadowing programs, everybody knows about shadowing, but back then in the day, it wasn't quite as big. But I called up The Wire and asked if I could shadow, and they asked to see my reel, and they saw my reel and they said yes. And I was like, okay, this is great. Television was easy. Little did I know that that would start my 10-year career as a shadow. So I spent the next 10 years, I taught at NYU. I would do a commercial here and there. But I kind of really just tried to get into TV by any means possible. And it took a long time, but eventually the stars lined up. I was shadowing on an episode of Law and Order SVU. The director, one of the lead actors, Andre Brower, who had a recurring role, wasn't available for the time slot of the episode because he was doing a pilot in Hawaii. And the director who was doing that episode wasn't available later because he was doing Breaking Bad of all shows. And so I ended up shooting those scenes for that episode. And finally the wall cracked. Slowly at first. The next season, they asked me back to do a whole episode. The following season, another one. And then I did another show, and then I did another show. And then suddenly, after all those years, the gates opened up. And knock on wood, I've been incredibly fortunate. You know, I think also timing is, you know, they say timing is everything. I was very lucky that I finally ended up on the right side of history. When I was really, really ready and prepared, after 10 years of watching other people do what I wanted to do, when I was finally given a chance to show what I could do, I was able to kind of really, you know, establish myself.
Yeah, exactly. So in the beginning, and then when you were mid-career shifting and, you know, making those decisions, do you have any memory of some advice that sort of stuck in your mind, or a person that you were watching closely? Obviously you were shadowing, but anything that sort of stuck in your mind, or a person that stuck in your mind?
Well, I was very fortunate to have some great mentors, including the most amazing, fabulous director, Alan Coulter, who's just a phenomenal director. And, you know, anything he said, anything that came from Alan, was gold. So no, I was really lucky. I had some fantastic mentors. And, but I think the greatest advice you can ever have doesn't come from outside, it comes from within. And from within, the more I did this, even though to the world, sometimes I felt a little ridiculous because I would run into people and they'd be like, so what are you doing? And I'd be like, shadowing. It was a little embarrassing, you know. 7 years in, you start to go, okay, am I determined or delusional? And there were definitely times where I was like, this is starting to be a bit ridiculous. Like, you know, when, you know, but the little voice inside me, which is the most important voice that you have, always knew that this was right for me, that television was a great fit for my skill sets and just for who I am and for what I like to do. So I never gave up. Giving up was never an option. I always figured it was just a matter of time, because I always felt like it was just so close. And eventually I was right. So
well,
listen to that little voice.
If it felt right here, you had to just go with it, right? So what is the difference? You know, I hear about people ask about internships and things like that. Is this shadowing versus an internship? Were you working for free? Were you being paid to do what you were doing? You know, can you say a little bit more about what that meant?
Yeah, it's very different from an internship, because an internship is something like when you're like, you know, starting out and it's like you have a job and you do little things. Shadowing is very different. Shadowing, you don't really have a job. Your job is to have no substance yet, observe everything and watch. You're just watching. That's all you do. You watch, you know, and nowadays they have a lot of programs, the directors, a lot of shadowing programs. And now things have changed a lot since I first started shadowing, I have to say. Because for me in the beginning, it was just me reaching out to people. You're talking about networking. We can talk more about that, because networking was key. Reaching out, but showing up for free. So it was, you know, it was expensive, but you know, I you know, did whatever I could to take the time and take time to shadow and be
building those relationships.
All about building relationships. And it's really, I liken it to gardening. You have to plant the seeds, then you have to kind of nourish the seeds. And eventually some of those seeds might grow into shoots. There's still no fruit. You still can't eat those seeds, but and then if you're lucky, there's some leaves, and then eventually the leaves turn into flowers, and then eventually the flowers turn into fruit, and then you can finally eat. So, you know, it's hard, because you have to support yourself while you're doing that, and it takes a lot of time. But again, nowadays it's different. A lot of these studios and networks have programs, and people are paid, not a lot of money, but they can do it. And I don't know anybody else who had to shadow 10 years.
Well, but look where it's gotten you. So one question from the audience here is, what is the etiquette of being a shadow? You know, I remember even being a PA on the set in my early career, you kind of want to be invisible and, you know, stay away. So what is your presence like as a shadow, and give us like a typical day on a set when you were shadowing, if you wouldn't mind.
You get up early, you have to be there before call time, you want to be there before everybody else. So you're getting up at 4:30, 5 in the morning, you're showing up. And it's very difficult being a shadow, because you're you have to be 100% present. You can't be on your phone doing stuff. You have to be 100% present, and yet completely, as I say, have no weight, no substance, not bother anybody, not even speak unless spoken to, just watch. And I think it prepares you really well for television, because television, and I think anything in life, in a weird way, it was a transformative experience, because, you know, I started directing very young. I was used to like having my opinions and, you know, being a director. And this taught me to be a much better director, because I think a good director knows how to listen. A good director knows when to not speak.
Well, and that's something I noticed in your short reel. And like I said, your list of episodes is very much my watch list. And there's a lot of emotion and drama in just your short reel. And so you must have that ability to know when to step back as a director and when to let the actors take it. So I imagine 10 years as a shadow, you watch good directors knowing when, and you obviously have some instinct.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is making me think about, you know, we're Minnesota Women in Film and Television, and what we want to do. We are an education and connection organization. I love the idea of shadowing, and that could be something that we could encourage in our industry here in Minnesota. And are you saying that there are programs like this out there, like you're part of DGA out east? So there are programs like this in the world right now that people can look to. I think, is that a valuable goal for an organization like ours, to encourage that sort of activity?
I really do believe so. And what happened is, in 2014, the DGA negotiated with the studios and networks as part of our basic agreement that they all had to have programs to help promote inclusion. And so you know, CBS has one, NBC has one, Warner Brothers has one, Sony has one. So there are programs currently that exist. They're very competitive. You have to apply. But I believe that it doesn't have to go through those programs. Like anybody, any kind of experience is experience. And watching other people work, active watching, you learn what to do and what not to do, more importantly. It's really the mistakes that matter the most. And watching somebody else make mistakes and having the freedom to pretend like you're doing it in your head, and then, but there's no risk, is super valuable.
That's really good. You know, I've heard of active listening as a consultant and somebody. That's something I do with my clients. But active watching, now that's a new skill. What kind of advice or recommendations would you have? As I told you earlier, we have members all across the board. There are mid-career people. We just had someone join recently who is probably in her 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, I don't know, but she is representing women later in their career, very young women. So how would you recommend people approach someone when they're looking to either change a direction in their career, or, you know, how do you approach someone to ask for this? It's a gift to be able to shadow. So how would what's a good approach?
Well, again, it's different nowadays because there are programs. Before, I could just kind of did it all on my own and I would approach people. I think that, like, for a network show, it's less likely to work that way because they have their own programs. Their people who are in their program have priority. But let's say you're shadowing a commercial director or you're shadowing somebody else. I think the most important thing is to do your homework and really, again, watch their work and know their work and be interested in their work and become an expert in their work. And then ask really good questions about it when the opportunity to ask questions arises. Don't ask too many questions. Know when to ask the questions, but the more well-versed you are in what that person has done, the better the connection.
It's like, don't show up to a job interview without doing your research. So it's
exactly.
know your subject. Talk to us a little bit about when you were going through this period. Did you take part in any groups like WIFT? I know that Los Angeles has some. And what did you get out of those? What would you love to have had, or what did you love about some of the support groups and gatherings that you were part of?
I'm a huge believer in these groups, honestly, and networking has been key to my path. I'm a member of New York Women in Film. There's also a wonderful group in New York called Film Fatales that are actually there. They have chapters everywhere. But I was at one of the very first Film Fatales meetings. It was absolutely wonderful, very different format. And then I became very involved with the Directors Guild, and that's been incredible. I was at one point the chair of the Focus on Women committee, because I really do believe in women helping women, and helped organize events. And, you know, the more you reach out, and organizing events is a great way to connect with people who you want to connect with, because if you just do it as you as an individual, it only goes so far. But if you do it as part of an organization, putting on a panel with people who you're dying to meet, that's the best way to meet them. So I could not encourage people to, I mean, showing up is huge and really, really important. And I went to everything that I possibly could during that time, nowadays, I have a lot less opportunities. I just because I'm busy. But, you know, any kind of event, it's always good to go to, because it's like, not just the people who you know, you think can lift you, but also your peers, because eventually your peers become the people, your people grow with you.
Right. And now with the online ways to connect with people, you can reach out much easier and start to get to know folks. For people just starting out who maybe don't have a lot of connections, what tips would you give to someone to find shadowing opportunities? And not necessarily on either of the coasts, but, you know, Minneapolis, St. Paul has a decent production community. Are you a fan of cold calling someone after you've done your homework, of course? And how would you recommend someone just starting out?
You know, I would say try anything, but don't be annoying. You know, I think it's best if you meet somebody at an event.
Okay.
That's usually the best, is an in-person meeting. I cold called The Wire, so it worked out for me. So you definitely don't want to bug people, and you have to know when to, like, but that's why in-person is usually the best. And going to events is really key.
Okay, I have a question from the audience here. It says, there are so many shows in production in our new golden age of long format. How do you chart your course and decide which projects to pursue?
Great question. And that is a challenge. And I'm very fortunate to finally be in a place in my career where I turn down more work than I accept, but there's always the job. It happened to me very recently. I accepted a job, and then a much better job, like a dream job, came along. And I had already accepted the job, and it's bad form to drop out. So, you know, it's hard to say no. You know, I had enough lean years it just goes against my grain to say no to work. Work is sacred, you know, especially when you haven't had enough for many years. So it can be a challenge, because you have to kind of play chicken, but and you never know if something better is going to come along. So you just have to trust your instinct, like, I'm lucky I have great, you know, agent and manager, and we can discuss these things together. We can bounce it off each other and say, well, what do you think? You know, is this going to lead to something else, or is this kind of, you know, what are the pros, what are the cons of doing this job versus another job?
And so along those lines, you mentioned an agent and a manager. Not every person in the industry needs an agent and a manager. You know, the people that are just working on some of the the other crew positions, maybe just out there freelancing, probably part of unions and so on. Is it just who you know, and you're just kind of, do you set a set of goals and values as to what kind of projects you're taking? I don't know.
Yes, but you also have to be open-minded, and when an opportunity comes, it doesn't always come in the way that you expected.
Yeah.
So you have to be nimble enough to be able to jump in with 2 feet, and also just know when something excites you. I mean, that's the key thing. It's like, that's the best kind of barometer, again, is your gut. But sometimes you do projects where you're not sure, and the outcome ends up being way better than you thought, or you made a connection through that leads to something else, that leads to something else. Again, it's a gardening metaphor. You have to plant a lot of seeds, and you don't know which ones are actually going to take root, and which ones are going to flower, and which ones are going to give you fruit. So you don't want to spread yourself too thin, but you can't put all your eggs in one basket, to mix metaphors here.
Metaphors are good, mixed or not. I have a question here that wants to know what kind of challenges specifically related to being a woman in the industry have you run into, and how have you approached them as you have gone on your journey?
Well, initially my attitude and my approach was just to ignore it and to pretend that it didn't matter, or even believe that it didn't matter, even though the statistics spoke otherwise, my path spoke otherwise. It was, but you can't, if you get bogged down in that kind of thinking, it doesn't help. And frankly, nowadays the tide has turned, and I wouldn't say it's an advantage, but kind of the tide has turned. And, there was a time where, they would have an episode, they would have a season of television, they'd have just a few slots for women. And now I think that people are really, they want more women in the business. And it's benefited me.
Good, that's really good to hear. I have another question here. This person says, hello, Laura. I am a young woman of color who's just joined WIFT and who has been more on the acting side of things and does all of this work for acting. I'm looking to get into PA and production as a way of getting on set and learning the industry, and I'm much better in person.
Well, hopefully there will be more and more in-person events, because that's really better than Zoom, obviously. Yeah, being on set is great. And I think, even if your end goal is acting, being on set and watching other actors on set and seeing just kind of the rhythm of it and what's expected, and how, it's not easy. Any kind of experience is good and can help. Not to mention, again, meeting people and being on set and being like, hey, I'm an actor.
Yeah. And so it doesn't really matter if you ultimately want to be an actor, to pursue the shadowing opportunities isn't a bad idea, to shadow someone on a set, even if your ultimate goal is to be an actor, because you're learning the rhythm of the set.
Yeah.
You're going to be a smarter actor because you understand the rhythm of the set, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This next question says, challenges for women in the industry are different than what they used to be. What has changed for the better, and what has changed for the worse?
Mostly things have changed for the better, markedly. Like the numbers, the Directors Guild releases statistics, and just a few years ago, 87% of all episodes of television were directed by men. That number has come down. We just got a report yesterday. It's shrunk considerably. I think we're almost at 39% of episodes are directed by women in just a few short years, in about 5 years. That's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Yes, we want parity, but we're getting there at kind of it's happening now, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah. Allison Gesso, the president of WIFT, and I had a conversation with I'm gonna blank on her name, Gina, the gender
Foundation, yes.
Thank you. What? Yes, I'm
Gina Davis. Yeah.
Thank you. And they were talking about that and how it is moving in that direction, which is really wonderful to hear, because I've been around for a while and it wasn't always like that. So
Oh, far from it. So it's really, you know, again, it was a lot of things, cultural things, the Me Too movement, definitely people opened people's eyes. There was a huge shift with that. You know, I think that, you know, efforts by, you know, or guilds like the Directors Guild that I'm very involved in, like we have all sorts of initiatives. And I think when we started to really push, the Directors Guild for decades was pushing, but when we finally got the studios to commit to having programs and everything, things started to really change.
One of the, I interviewed one of our board members a year ago, and she talked about, she's young, and she talked about when she first, I believe she's an AD, something, I can't remember right now. But she talked about coming onto set as a non-traditional female role and trying to act like a guy, you know, wearing the t-shirts and, you know, trying to be a, and then one day she realized, I'm just going to be who I am. And she went with her pink hair and she just was, and how it changed how people treated her when she just was herself. And I think that's one of the things that I've seen women stopping that whole, I have to act like men in order to be taken seriously. And it's wonderful to see a woman like you who is truly yourself and being so successful. So thank you for being such a wonderful role model.
But yeah, I do believe that. I believe don't try to be anything you aren't. Just be who you are and care about what you do and do it as well as you can. And people will respect you, but you can't like fight it. You can't try and prove it. You don't have to prove anything. There's nothing to prove. Just show up, be who you are. And that's more than enough.
In my world, which is not film and television anymore, it's more working with women who are trying to come up with a way to have a harmonious life where there is family, there are their businesses, there's everything. How do you recommend and anchor yourself or center yourself with a personal life and you're very busy traveling and all the rest with stress and anxiety and all of that? Do you have any words of wisdom, or have you discovered a way that you can do this for yourself? You
know, I used to believe that personal life and professional life competed against each other. And that if things went well in one, they wouldn't go as well in the other. And I am happy to say that I've never been happier in my personal or professional life. I'm getting married in July, actually, a month away, a month and 10 days. But in that regard, I'll be honest, it's not always easy. First of all, I'm very lucky that I have that. I found a partner who he understands the business. He's in the business, and he's very understanding of my schedule, and we just work it out and figure it out. I'm also, it's not easy having kids in this business. I have a daughter, and soon I'm going to have, you know, stepsons, but that's different. Timing helps me, and I'm just being really honest here. My career just happened and really exploded when my daughter was a senior in high school, and really exploded when she was in college. And the fact that I was free to travel and pick up and spend a month in Vancouver, a month here, a month, you know, in New Orleans, a month there, go to Australia, and not have to leave my child behind. It made things easier, to be honest. And I have a lot of director friends, a lot of director women friends who have younger children, and they make it work. It's far from impossible. You know, I have a very good friend who's about to go to Australia for 2 months, and she's bringing her family with her, but it's definitely easier with older children. So, but there's no reason, and I know a bunch of women who have younger children, and they make it work. So there is absolutely no reason why it has to be a choice either or.
Yeah,
it's definitely challenging, but thank God for FaceTime.
Yeah.
You know, it's different. Like talking on the phone is one thing, but seeing people at the end of the day, seeing faces, not just hearing voices, there are ways to stay connected. As we know from COVID, you know, Zooms, FaceTime, it's not the same thing as in person as the real thing, but the technology has helped a lot.
Yes, it really has. My 87-year-old mom said that last night when she was talking to her granddaughter. She said, oh, you know, there are some things about technology that aren't so bad.
Yeah.
And it really does help.
Huge difference.
No, I agree with you. I think there are ways for, you know, women and men to, it's not a balance because nothing's ever going to be equal, but there is a harmony that you can bring to a life. And have a fabulous career. So it's wonderful to see that with you. Another question from the audience is, what series, do you have a favorite of the series you've worked on? Maybe you don't want to say, but what series did you enjoy directing the most? And do you have some great stories for us about fun or intensity or anything that you would love to share about some of your directing experiences?
Wow. Well, usually whatever I'm working on is my favorite thing because I'm so in the moment with it. But I do have a couple that were particularly fun. Just recently, I was in Budapest for 2.5 weeks. I was doing Shadow and Bone. It's going to be a while before it comes out just because there's so many visual effects. And oh, that was a blast. I love Budapest. And it was just such a fun, epic visual feast. Wow. Amazing cast, just wonderful crew. I really have loved working on The Walking Dead. That was really just again a great team, and you know, shows like Preacher have been really fun just because they're visually delicious. And it was fun. And my last episode of Preacher, which was quite a few years ago, I shot in Australia. I like working in foreign countries. So no, I can't say I have one favorite. It's kind of like asking like, who's your favorite child? You know, but there are definitely some shows that really do stand out.
Another question here is, what's it like working with editors and on the set on projects that require a lot of CGI?
Oh, great question. I love working with editors because I always joke that I am actually working for the editor, that the editor is the boss, because when I'm shooting, I always imagine myself sitting in the edit room with the editor and going, oh, why didn't I just get that shot? Or why did I do so many takes of that? We had it in the second take. Like, why are we sitting through that? So I think very editorially, and I shot list and think how everything cuts together. So I really, truly enjoy the editing process, and I love collaborating with an editor because I have very clear ideas of how I want it, but it's always fun when somebody brings a fresh perspective. As far as visual effects, I love visual effects. It's kind of like painting, and it's all about, you know, layering and imagining things, and it's really fun to design, and it's really fun to work with the whole team to create these images. You know, it's like there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of pre-visualization. I draw pictures, I take pictures on my iPad and we draw on them, and then you know, I hope I'm not like spoiler alert, but I got to play, like we were doing in Shadow and Bone, a lot of visual effects, and there's some kind of creature, I won't say what it is, at one point that I got to, like, you know, we had these people dressed in green suits running around being those creatures, but every once in a while I would be the creature, be like, okay, everybody, I'm the monster.
Fun.
It's fun. It's like make-believe.
That sounds great. And another audience question is, what is it like? Because directors do change on these episodic television shows. What's it like coming into an established group, you know, a crew? I know how
that's the odd thing about being a television director. It's not your team, you're the stranger. So it's very much, and it's very odd. It's kind of full of contradictions because you're the outsider, but you're also the leader. I think you have to approach it like it being an anthropologist, because you're literally landing in a tribe. And you have just a couple days to understand this tribe and the dynamics and how to work within this tribe, and what are the values of this tribe, and what are the ways of this tribe. And you have to really wrap your head around their culture. One of my mentors, Michael Slovis, said to me, one of the most important things is understanding the culture of a show. Because every show is different. Every show has a different culture. And you have to work within that, the framework of the culture of the show.
That sifting through the sand really and finding the little pieces that tell you about that culture. That's a really good analogy. I like that very much. Okay, here's another one. How much latitude do you have to make changes to the story and the dialogue when you join that show?
Again, it depends on the show. Every show is different. The culture of the show is different. Some shows, they want every single word as written exactly, you know, on book, as they say. Mm-hmm. Other shows, you can be like, hey, you know, what about this or what about that? Or an actor might want to change something. And so really, it kind of runs the gamut. It varies a lot, though. The one thing that's consistent in television is you never have much time. So you don't really have a lot of time to change things, you know, but oftentimes you have to change things for budget reasons or because the location is slightly different or whatnot. So there is always, you know, by the time you're done shooting, you know, you have half a dozen drafts sometimes because there have been changes that have been changing during your very short prep.
What's your preference?
Sometimes on the day you change it, but it really depends on the show.
What's your preference? Do you like to have that latitude to make changes, or are you fine with working?
I'm fine both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, it depends. Like, you know, those who have like very clear vision of how they want it, it's fun working that way. And it's also really super fun to collaborate and be able to go, you know, maybe these two scenes, we can combine them because that way we could, because the schedule isn't working out, but it actually makes the scene more dynamic if we combine it. So that there's like a pivot in the middle of the scene, but it also just is easier to shoot. We can shoot that as one and save a lot of time.
So I imagine this is a different, at your stage in your career right now, it may be different, but when you are getting ready to talk to someone about perhaps becoming the director on a series, what is the pitch like? Do you have to prepare a pitch deck? Do you just go in and talk? Do they just look at your reel?
It depends, but no, pitch decks and all that we don't do. That's like for a pilot or something. Because when you come in on something that's established, you know, you're speaking the language of the show. So you're not reinventing the wheel. You can stretch it, you can add your flourishes, but you have to understand that language. You're not reinventing the language. It depends, you know, sometimes it's just based on, you know, word of mouth, people who I've worked with, or, you know, sometimes there are interviews where you get, you know, I'll get on a Zoom nowadays and talk about things and talk about the show. They might send you a script and then you discuss it, or they might even send a pilot or something.
Is there ever a time when an unknown director, someone who's never done episodic television, will get hired to do an episode of, you know, an established show like this? Or does that just not happen? Do they have
to? Yeah, everybody had a first episode once. So everybody once was not established and got a break. So and nobody was born having directed several episodes of television. So it happens all the time.
So are those folks looking at their commercial reels, or, you know, what are they looking at to get hired, or have they been shadowing? Is that?
It depends. Like traditionally, people used to come up through the ranks of like the show they were on. They might be an assistant director on the show, or a cinematographer on the show, or one of the camera operators, or script supervisor. A lot of, you know, female directors started as script supervisors. So they already know the show. They know the pace. They know what the coverage is. They know the actors. And then other people come in from, like, you know, independent film, or, you know, I came from commercials. And usually people who kind of come from outside nowadays, they're, you know, it's either they know somebody or the programs now.
Sounds wonderful. Well, we are coming to the top of the hour here. I would love to give you an opportunity to just wrap this up with a few words of advice for our membership about, moving forward in their careers, whether they're just starting out or mid-career, making changes. Do you have some words of wisdom for them?
Not to sound corny, but I truly believe in following your dream. And I feel like that holding on to that as your North Star, holding on to what you love to do. Imagine what it is that you want to wake up to every day. Like, imagine what is the life you want to have, and who do you want to be working with, and what is it that you want to be doing? You gotta dream, and don't be afraid to dream big. Like, what's the worst that can happen? I feel like you aim as high as you can, and where you land, you land. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, it doesn't always happen, but worked for me at least, and I honestly, to this day, I mean, even this morning, I pinch myself sometimes. I cannot believe how fortunate I am. And yes, I worked hard. I put in a lot of time. But there are times where I just want to hug my former self and thank my former self, who was the only person who believed in me. And I just want to turn around and just give her a giant hug and say, thank you for believing. Thank you for having had the courage to think you could when nobody else could. I had friends who joked, I was like, that book, The Little Engine That Could, which was one of my favorite books as a child. I think I can, 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 I think I can. And that was my driving force for so long. And I was the only person who saw it. So it's gratifying to go, okay, former self, thank you.
Okay, those are some words of wisdom. I love that. I mean, that's why I do what I do now, is because women need to hold themselves up. We are the only one who's always in our own circle. So thank you, Laura Belsey, for all of your time and wisdom this evening.
My pleasure.
Sincerely appreciate it. Linda, thank you for introducing us to Laura. And Allison, we would like to invite you to the stage to tell us about what MinWift is all about.
Absolutely. But first off, I'd like to honestly thank Laura for graciously giving your time here today and your knowledge. It's not so often that we get to, have a direct contact with somebody who is so engaged and involved in the industry. So I really do think this has been a great opportunity for everyone who's attended today. Kelly, I want to thank you for your beautiful and fantastic conversational skills over here. So we're able to learn so much just from not only what you've known, but then also just what we've been picking up here from Laura. And then to everyone who was able to attend tonight, I know that this is the one day in Minnesota where we have perfect weather, but you all decided to join us. So we really do appreciate that. So for those of you who may be new to us or just coming across Minnesota Women in Film and Television, again, our goal is to help raise the equity of women in film within the industry. And so we have a ton of programs such as our mentor-mentee, so the mentorship program that we kicked off here earlier this year. We're looking to have more educational and just content-driven events. So in addition to, we have like a kind of TV series thing going on here this year, but we do plan to have a couple of screenwriters that are local to Minnesota who are currently also working within the industry, but we plan to have an event here later in the year, just kind of, again, getting knowledge from them. And then obviously later in the year, plan to be part of the Catalyst Festival as well. So definitely stay on top of our social media. If you haven't joined our organization yet, it is, you can find out more information at minwift.org. So that's MNWIFT.org. And then there's a few of you on here who recently joined us and have already benefited so much. So again, I encourage you to continue to participate in the industry and participate in the community, because that's the only way that we can get stronger as an organization. And again, thank you all so much for just being here today.